Usually when we talk about a major frontier of human exploration, there's this collective expectation of upward momentum.
Right, yeah. Up and out.
Exactly. Like, think about engineering a rocket. You pull out the blueprints, you construct this massive silver cylinder, you point the thrusters at the sky, and boom, there's this highly visible, fiery trajectory into the stars.
It's a very clean, universally understood narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, the progression of space exploration is incredibly linear in our minds.
Yeah.
We continually strive to go higher, push further, move faster into the vacuum.
Which is comforting, I think.
Absolutely. That upward trajectory is comforting to us as a species because we just love the concept of conquering the stars, reaching out into the light. The metrics for success are so obvious: altitude and distance.
But then, you pivot and step into the world of ocean exploration, and suddenly that telescope we've been pointing at the heavens is flipped upside down and plunged into just complete crushing darkness.
Yeah, it's a completely different paradigm.
It really is. We are looking at an exploratory landscape that isn't clean or, highly visible. It's murky. It's incredibly heavy. And surprisingly, it is a frontier that humanity largely just, we stopped building permanent homes in it. We essentially walked away from the deep.
I mean, forgotten frontier is really the perfect term for it.
Yeah.
We have spent the last several decades with our eyes fixed upward, channeling hundreds of billions of dollars into low Earth orbit and beyond, while largely ignoring the massive pressurized universe right here on our own planet.
The one that literally keeps us alive.
Exactly. The deep ocean covers most of the globe. It regulates our climate. It holds unimaginable biological diversity. And yet our permanent footprint down there is, virtually non-existent.
Which is wild to think about. But welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking you, the listener, on a journey into that exact forgotten universe.
And it is a fascinating journey.
Oh, I am incredibly excited to unpack this because we are talking about a literal paradigm shift in how human beings exist on planet Earth.
A monumental shift, yeah.
For the first time in 40 years, an entirely new open ocean subsea research habitat has been built and deployed. We're pulling today from some really fascinating source material, specifically detailed excerpts chronicling the launch and the mission of a structure called Vanguard.
Right, Vanguard. And Vanguard is this revolutionary habitat built by an ocean engineering company simply called Deep.
Deep. Simple, but effective.
Very. And the excerpts we are analyzing today give us a front row seat to an engineering marvel and a profound shift in scientific methodology. What they're trying to accomplish isn't just about setting records, it's about fundamentally altering our physical relationship with the ocean.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to really get under the hood of this project. We are going to explore exactly how Vanguard works, the literal nuts and bolts of living under immense pressure.
Which is mind-blowing on its own.
It really is. And we are going to unpack why there was this baffling 40-year gap in this kind of infrastructure. And we'll look at how a massive structure anchored to the seabed in the Florida Keys is setting out to literally, and this is a direct quote from the source, by the way, make humans aquatic.
I love that quote. That phrase, make humans aquatic. It really sets the tone for everything we're about to discuss today.
It does.
Because it implies a permanent transition, not just a temporary visit.
Okay, let's unpack that transition. Because when I first read the phrase underwater habitat, my mind immediately went to submarines.
Sure, most people's do.
Right. I pictured a sophisticated tube that you pilot around for an afternoon, or maybe a temporary diving bell that gets lowered down on a crane and pulled back up before dinner. But the source material makes it very clear that Vanguard is not a vehicle.
No, not at all.
Doesn't move. It is a sustained underwater home.
And the distinction between a vehicle and a habitat is the foundational premise of this entire endeavor. I mean, a submarine is a transient vessel.
It's just visiting.
Exactly. It's designed to penetrate an environment, complete a task, and retreat back to the surface. A habitat, on the other hand, is a commitment to the environment.
Right.
And synthesizing what it means for a scientific field to go 4 decades without a major infrastructure update to its habitats is just staggering.
40 years.
Yeah, imagine if the aerospace industry had just stopped sending anything into orbit in the mid-1980s.
Wow. We'd still be looking at their early space shuttle era as the pinnacle of human achievement.
Exactly.
We wouldn't have the International Space Station, no modern satellite constellations, no commercial spaceflight. The entire field would just be frozen in amber.
And that is essentially the reality underwater habitats have faced.
That's so crazy.
I mean, the golden age of undersea living was the 1960s and 70s. projects like Jacques Cousteau's Conshelf and the U.S. Navy Sea Lab.
Right, I remember seeing old footage of those.
Yeah, there was a brief moment where it looked like we were going to build actual villages on the continental shelf,
Yeah,
but then the focus shifted.
because of the robots, right.
Precisely. Remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, became highly capable. It just became cheaper and vastly safer to send a robot down with a camera than to try and keep humans alive under pressure.
Yeah, the life support alone is a nightmare.
Huge nightmare. So funding dried up and the momentum just completely stalled.
I was wondering about that gap, actually. It makes sense that if you can send a drone, you avoid the whole life support issue.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, a drone looking through a lens is never going to replicate the serendipity of a human being actually living in the environment, noticing the peripheral details, feeling the current shift.
You lose the human intuition.
Right. So Deep comes along with a mission to kickstart this new era to bring the human element back, and Vanguard is their flagship.
What's fascinating here is the sheer technological leap between the last generation of habitats and Vanguard. It is difficult to overstate.
It's basically skipping 40 years of evolution.
The source explicitly asks us to consider how much technology has evolved and advanced during that 40-year time frame.
Think about computing power alone.
Oh, it's incomparable.
40 years ago, we were dealing with massive mainframe computers that had a fraction of the processing power of a modern smartwatch. We were using cassette tapes for data storage.
Cassette tapes underwater. Sounds fun.
Right. And material science was totally different. We didn't have the modern carbon fibers, the advanced titanium alloys, or the really sophisticated acrylics we have today.
Add to that the advancements in life support systems. Chemical scrubbing for breathable air, closed-loop telemetry, instantaneous global data transfers.
Just massive leaps.
Huge. For 4 decades, none of these exponential advancements were being integrated into a new, permanent underwater habitat. Deep is basically taking 40 years of missed technological evolution and compressing it into this single next-generation structure.
Wow.
They are applying the absolute cutting edge of the 21st century to a concept that was essentially abandoned in the 20th.
That is such a cool way to think about it. So let's dig into the specifics of the living space, because the source gives us a great layout.
It does it.
Vanguard features a central living chamber that sleeps 4 people. And directly integrated into those living quarters is a dedicated laboratory space. But, the timeline of the mission caught my attention.
The initial deployment.
Yeah. The initial plan for Vanguard is to allow this 4-person crew to spend 7 to 10 days below the surface. Eventually, they plan to extend that, but 7 to 10 days is the starting line.
7 to 10 days of sustained, uninterrupted underwater living.
Now, I have to admit, when I first read that timeline, I was a little underwhelmed.
Really?
Yeah, 7 to 10 days doesn't sound like a very long time for a permanently anchored structure. People go on a standard Caribbean cruise for 7 to 10 days.
It's true.
If you are building the first new habitat in 40 years with all this pent-up technological advancement, and your stated goal is to make humans aquatic, why such a brief window? Why not a month? Why not a 6-month expedition right out of the gate?
Well, the source addresses this by referring to the initial deployment as the beachhead moment.
A beachhead? That's a military concept, isn't it? Like establishing a secure foothold before you bring in the rest of the army.
Exactly. And it translates perfectly to extreme environment engineering. When you land on a completely foreign, fundamentally hostile shore, whether that is Normandy, the surface of the moon, or the mesophotic zone of the ocean, you don't immediately attempt to build a sprawling, permanent metropolis.
Right. You just try to survive day one.
You establish a beachhead. You
Yeah.
carve out a small, hyper-secure zone to validate your immediate survival.
So you have to prove you can survive the initial landing and extraction before you start pouring concrete for the city.
Yeah, the source notes that the primary objective of this initial phase is proving they can take people in and out safely. You cannot jump straight to a 6-month deployment when you are introducing an entirely new, deeply complex life support system in an environment where the ambient pressure actively wants to crush you.
And the salt water wants to eat all your electronics.
Exactly. It wants to corrode every exposed circuit. So the 7 to 10-day window is a rigorous stress test. It's about proving the core safety mechanics, validating the atmospheric scrubbers, testing the thermal regulation, and finalizing the logistics of crew transfer under pressure.
It's all the boring but vital stuff.
Expanding the timeline only happens after those fundamental operations are flawless.
Okay, so it's essentially a shakedown cruise, but for a stationary building. That makes sense.
Yeah,
You have to learn to walk and ensure the floor isn't going to collapse under you before you can start running marathons on the seabed.
precisely.
But just surviving those initial 7 days requires a type of engineering that feels deeply counterintuitive to how we normally think about structures.
It's a total paradigm shift.
Because to live under the ocean for a week, this living space has to fundamentally change how human beings interact with water and pressure. And that leads us into the physical anatomy of Vanguard, which is where this starts to sound like pure science fiction to me.
The physical design philosophy of Vanguard is what separates it from standard marine vessels. The source states a really critical fact here. Vanguard operates at ambient pressure.
Okay, let's break that down, because ambient pressure sounds like a piece of dry engineering jargon, but it is the magic trick that makes the whole habitat function, isn't it?
It is the absolute core of the design.
It basically means the air pressure inside Vanguard is forcefully equalized to match the immense water pressure outside the habitat.
Right, and this dictates everything about the daily lives of the scientists inside. Ambient pressure means you are not living inside a rigid, perfectly sealed pressure cooker like a traditional military submarine.
So how does a traditional sub work for comparison?
Well, a traditional submarine is designed to maintain surface-level air pressure, 1 atmosphere inside the hull, regardless of how deep it goes.
So in a normal submarine, the crew feels like they are sitting in a living room on land, while outside, the ocean is squeezing the metal hull with thousands of pounds of force.
Exactly. The hull has to be incredibly thick steel or titanium just to fight that massive pressure differential.
And if you poke even a tiny hole in that hull,
It's catastrophic.
the water violently shoots in because the high-pressure ocean is trying to crush into the low-pressure air pocket.
Yes, Vanguard discards that battle entirely. Instead of fighting the ocean's pressure with thick steel, they embrace it.
Oh, wow.
By operating at ambient pressure, the life support systems pump the breathing gas inside the habitat up to match the exact pressure of the water outside. The internal pressure pushes out with the exact same force that the external water pushes in.
So the walls don't have to be massively thick.
Right. The structural stress on the habitat is actually minimized because the forces are balanced.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because those pressures are perfectly equalized, they can do something incredible. The source describes a feature called a wet porch, containing a moon pool, which they compare to having a swimming pool in your backyard.
The moon pool is the centerpiece of ambient pressure living. It's brilliant.
For you listening, I really want you to picture the floor of your living room right now. Now imagine a large, permanent trapdoor in that floor, permanently open, leading straight down into a bottomless ocean.
It sounds terrifying when you put it like that.
Right. You would expect the water to immediately rush up, flood your living room, and drown you. But in Vanguard, the water simply sits there at the level of the floor, gently lapping at the edges of the opening.
It just hovers.
It refuses to rise, all because the incredibly dense, pressurized air in the room is pushing down on the surface of the water with the exact same force the ocean is using to try and push up.
It is a stunning application of basic physics. I mean, if you take an ordinary glass from your kitchen, turn it upside down, and push it straight down into a bucket of water, the water doesn't fill the glass.
Right, the air gets trapped.
Exactly. The air inside gets trapped, compresses slightly, and holds the water at bay. Vanguard is just a highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar version of that upside-down glass.
It is so brilliant. So you have this wet porch, and the source says you can literally go jump in the ocean anytime you want to.
Yep.
There are no airlocks. There are no complex depressurization chambers you have to cycle through just to step outside. You just put on your dive gear, walk to the hole in the floor, and drop in.
And that accessibility fundamentally alters the workflow of marine research.
How so?
Because the researchers are living in that highly pressurized air, their bodies actually undergo a physiological change. Over the course of the first few hours, their blood and tissues absorb the breathing gases until they reach a state of equilibrium with the pressure.
Okay.
This is known as saturation diving.
They become saturated with the gas, and this is where the danger of decompression sickness or the bends comes into play. Right?
Yes, exactly. When a recreational scuba diver goes down from the surface, their body starts absorbing compressed nitrogen or helium. If they stay deep for too long, they accumulate too much gas in their tissues.
And coming up is the dangerous part.
Right. When they swim back up to the low-pressure surface, that trapped gas expands and forms bubbles in their bloodstream and joints, which is agonizingly painful and potentially fatal.
Yikes.
To avoid this, surface divers have to slowly ascend, stopping for long periods to let the gas safely off-gas through their lungs.
So a surface diver's life is entirely governed by a ticking clock.
Always watching the dive computer.
They spend an hour going down, they get maybe 20 minutes to actually look at a fish or grab a rock, and then they have to spend hours slowly floating back up just to avoid dying.
It is deeply inefficient.
Yeah, that sounds awful.
But when you live in Vanguard, you are already saturated at the target depth. The text notes that by being saturated, the scientists can conduct excursions out from the habitat, go deeper, and stay out vastly longer without the immediate need for surface decompression.
So they can just wake up, have a cup of coffee in the living quarters, strap on their fins, and step through the floor to go to work. They can spend 6, 7, 8 hours swimming around the reef, and when they are tired, they just swim back up into the moon pool, take off their gear, and eat dinner. No decompression required because they never return to surface pressure. They stay pressurized the entire week.
The elimination of the daily decompression penalty is truly the greatest gift Vanguard gives to human researchers.
It just changes everything about their day.
It does. But we also have to examine what ambient pressure means for the science itself, specifically the biological and geological samples they're collecting.
Oh, right.
The source emphasizes the revolutionary nature of the dedicated laboratory space located inside Vanguard.
Yeah, think about the current paradigm for marine biology. If a scientist spots a rare deep-sea sponge or a newly discovered species of crustacean on the seafloor, they collect it. But to actually study it, they have to bring it all the way up to a boat on the surface.
Which means dragging a delicate organism through a massive traumatic pressure change. The source points out that bringing a sample to the surface means the sample is going to be decompressed, and there will be a significant delay before it can be analyzed.
And I was reading about what actually happens to deep-sea creatures when they're pulled up. The decompression physically destroys them.
It was gruesome, honestly.
Their cells expand and rupture, their swim bladders invert, the dissolved gases in their own tissues bubble out, just like a human getting the bends.
Right.
By the time that rare crustacean reaches the laboratory on the boat, it doesn't look or behave anything like it did on the bottom. It's essentially a ruined specimen. You are trying to study the anatomy of an animal that has just undergone massive barotrauma.
Which fundamentally compromises the integrity of the data.
Yeah.
You aren't studying the creature in its natural state. You're studying a mangled artifact of the collection process.
Yeah.
Vanguard eliminates that barrier completely. The source states that the ability to bring a sample straight back into the habitat and conduct the analysis immediately is going to be unique and thrilling for the research community.
Because the laboratory inside Vanguard is at the exact same pressure as the ocean floor.
Yep.
When the scientist carries that sponge up through the moon pool and places it under a microscope on the lab bench, the sponge doesn't even know it left the ocean. The pressure hasn't changed by a single PSI.
You are bypassing the decompression phase entirely. The cellular integrity is preserved. The physiological processes continue normally.
That's huge.
The scientists can observe the specimen exactly as it exists in nature, extracting DNA or studying cellular functions without the confounding variable of pressure trauma. It accelerates the research cycle and dramatically increases the fidelity of the science.
Just put yourself in the shoes of a scientist for a second. Imagine the psychological shift.
Oh, it's night and day.
You aren't waking up at 4 a.m., loading heavy gear onto a rocking boat in the freezing wind, fighting seasickness, constantly checking your dive computer to make sure you don't overstay your bottom time.
And then rushing to collect samples in a state of mild panic before your time is up.
Right. Surface-based research is inherently stressful. It is basically a hostile raid into the deep.
A hostile raid, yeah.
But in Vanguard, your morning commute involves walking 10 feet from your bunk to the wet porch. You are living inside your laboratory, and your laboratory is located inside the experiment itself. The barrier between the observer and the observed is just completely dissolved.
And stepping out of that moon pool means entering a very specific, deeply mysterious layer of the water column.
Yes, the source is clear about Vanguard's operational parameters here. It says it is designed to explore what is called the mesophotic zone.
The mesophotic zone.
Now, the source notes that this zone ranges from roughly 20 meters down to 200 meters. For those of you used to feet, That's about 65 feet down to 650 feet below the surface.
Right. And etymologically, meso means middle, and photic refers to light. It is widely known among marine biologists as the twilight zone of the ocean.
The twilight zone.
Yeah, it represents a fascinating biological ecotone, a transition area.
It's kind of the forgotten middle child of the ocean, isn't it?
That's a great way to put it.
It's deep enough that the sunlight begins to severely filter out, turning the water a dark, inky blue. But it isn't the pitch black abyss where you find anglerfish and glowing squids. There is just enough residual light for specialized photosynthesis to occur, meaning you find these incredibly unique deep water coral ecosystems that have adapted to near darkness.
The tragedy of the mesophotic zone is its inaccessibility.
Why is it so hard to get to?
Well, it is generally too deep for standard recreational scuba divers, using compressed air to safely spend any meaningful time. Yet, it is often considered too shallow to justify the immense expense of deploying a massive deep-sea robotic submarine or a manned submersible designed for the Marianas Trench.
So it just gets skipped over.
Basically. Therefore, it has been largely bypassed by the bulk of modern oceanographic study.
The source provides a wonderfully vivid analogy for what it has been like trying to study this twilight zone up until now.
I love this part.
It says that diving from the surface used to be like floating over a tropical forest in a hot air balloon, dipping a butterfly net down into the canopy, and just trying to catch things.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the frustration of marine biologists attempting to catalog a biome they can barely touch.
Let's really lean into that visual for a moment to understand how absurd our current methodology is. Imagine you are tasked with writing a comprehensive textbook on the ecology of the Amazon rainforest,
Okay.
but your only method of observation is hovering 1,000 feet in the air in a hot air balloon.
It's impossible.
You can't see the forest floor through the thick canopy. You have this incredibly long, unwieldy butterfly net on a rope. You blindly plunge it into the leaves, swish it around for 10 seconds, and haul it back up.
And you catch, what, a leaf?
Exactly. You catch 3 random leaves, a confused beetle, and a broken twig. And from that isolated, chaotic grab, you try to extrapolate how the entire Amazonian food web functions, how the predators hunt, and how the plants reproduce.
It is a methodology born of necessity, but it is scientifically impoverished. Traditional surface diving into the mesophotic zone, because of the severe decompression limits we discussed, is exactly that. A brief, frantic dash and grab.
Right.
You achieve a snapshot, a singular isolated moment, frozen in time. And worse, that snapshot is heavily influenced by the chaos of your arrival.
Because you're making a ton of noise.
You descend blowing loud bubbles, shining bright artificial lights and thrashing the water. You scare away the apex predators, the shy crustaceans retreat into their burrows, and all you observe is the immediate aftermath of your own disturbance.
But with Vanguard, the paradigm flips. The source proudly states they are no longer in the balloon. The quote is, "We're in the canopy now, and we're camping out in the canopy, and we're there every day and at night."
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the shift from transient sampling to permanent occupation is revolutionary for behavioral science and ecology.
Why specifically?
When you drop the butterfly net, you only see what happens to be in the path of the net at that exact second. But biological systems operate over hours, days, and lunar cycles.
I'm thinking about the at night part of that quote, actually. A massive percentage of ocean life is strictly nocturnal.
Oh, absolutely.
The coral polyps only extend their feeding tentacles in the dark. Certain predators only leave their caves when the sun goes down. The entire reef undergoes a massive shift change at dusk.
Exactly. Mating rituals, feeding frenzies, spawning events, so much of the dynamic life of a reef is invisible during the day. If your entire data set is built on 45-minute scuba dives conducted at noon, you are blind to half the ecosystem's existence.
You're literally in the dark about it.
Right. The source highlights that camping out in the canopy allows researchers to observe animal behavior full-time. You can identify complex long-term patterns that surface-based science would entirely miss.
I love their canopy concept, but I want to expand the analogy to really ground it.
Let's hear it.
Think about trying to understand a major complex city like New York or Tokyo. Taking a surface dive into the mesophotic zone is like trying to study Tokyo by taking a blurry photograph out of the window of a bullet train as you speed past the outskirts.
That's a great visual.
You see a flash of neon, a few buildings, and then it's gone. Vanguard is the equivalent of actually renting an apartment downtown, sitting on your second-story balcony with a cup of coffee, and just watching the neighborhood day and night.
That is an excellent way to frame it. When you rent the apartment, you begin to observe the interconnected systems.
Yeah, you see the rhythm of the place.
You see the morning commute start at 7 a.m. You see the delivery trucks restock the restaurants at noon. You see how the energy of the street fundamentally changes when the nightlife takes over at midnight. You start recognizing the same individuals walking the same routes. You map the relationships.
You stop looking at isolated incidents and start understanding the flow of the city. Vanguard allows researchers to sit on their underwater balcony and watch the neighborhood flow.
Exactly.
They can observe which species of fish form symbiotic relationships with which corals, how a predator's territory shifts in response to tidal changes, or how the local ecology reacts to minute temperature fluctuations over a full 24-hour cycle. It transforms oceanography from a series of disconnected, frantic snapshots into a continuous, cinematic understanding of the world.
But of course, to rent an apartment in this extreme underwater neighborhood.
Yes. Here is the brutal reality. To survive in the mesophotic zone, you need a foundation that won't get ripped apart by the sheer fury of the ocean.
Which is a tall order.
The twilight zone isn't a calm, static aquarium. It is subject to some of the most violent hydrodynamic forces on the planet, especially where Vanguard is placing its first footprint. And that brings us to the extreme engineering required and the literal unprecedented rulebook that had to be authored just to make this legal and safe.
The physical reality of placing a permanent, life-sustaining structure in the open ocean is terrifyingly complex. We are dealing with an environment that actively seeks equilibrium by destroying anomalies.
The source outlines the structural defense mechanism. It states that Vanguard is anchored to the seabed by an 85-ton foundation structure.
85 tons.
35 tons. And it is deployed in the Tennessee Reef Marine Protected Area, which is located in the Florida Keys. The text makes a very specific, deliberate point about this location. It says Vanguard is designed to withstand hurricanes in the Florida Keys region.
The Florida Keys is one of the most hurricane-prone regions on Earth. Designing an underwater habitat to survive that is an engineering requirement that pushes the boundaries of material science and fluid dynamics.
This is where I found myself pausing and really trying to visualize the physics because 85 tons sounds massive.
It is.
It is the weight of a fully loaded commercial Boeing 737 airplane, just in the foundation. But we are talking about Category 5 hurricanes. We see the footage on the news storms churning the ocean surface into a washing machine, picking up yachts and throwing them onto highways, tearing the steel roofs off of hardened buildings.
The surface is absolute chaos.
But Vanguard is anchored 20 to 200 meters down. I initially thought, doesn't the water act as a shield? Does a surface storm of that magnitude really reach down and threaten a structure anchored in the twilight zone?
It is a common misconception that the deep ocean is entirely divorced from surface weather.
So it does reach...
Oh, definitely.
Oh.
While it is true that the most violent, chaotic, kinetic energy, the crashing breakers, the howling wind, the massive storm surge is isolated to the boundary layer between the air and the sea, that energy does not simply vanish.
Where does it go?
A hurricane transfers millions of megawatts of energy down into the water column.
So the wind pushes the water, and that water pushes the water beneath it, creating a cascading effect.
Precisely. It creates subsurface energy transfer. In oceanography, we look at wave base and fetch. The deeper you go, the more that circular wave energy begins to dissipate.
Okay.
However, in the shallower end of the mesophotic zone, around the 20 to 50 meter mark where Vanguard will likely establish its first operations, you are still going to experience profound hydrodynamic shifts during a Category 5 event.
Wow.
The habitat is going to be subjected to immense lateral currents, a violent surge, and pressure variations driven by the storm above.
So even if you are below the breaking waves, you are still caught in a massive invisible river that is rapidly changing direction and speed. The water itself becomes a battering ram.
If Vanguard were a lighter structure, or simply resting on the sand, a hurricane surge could easily generate enough lift and lateral drag to unmoor it, tumble it end over end across the delicate reef, and completely destroy both the habitat and the environment it was sent to study.
That would be a disaster.
A total disaster. So the 85-ton foundation is not arbitrary. It is a calculated necessity designed to weather that subsurface energy transfer. It acts as an immovable anchor, ensuring that no matter how violent the lateral shear forces become during a massive storm, the habitat remains perfectly stable, locked to the seabed, and safe for the inhabitants inside.
It is quite literally hurricane-proofed from the bottom up. But building a heavy metal box is only half the battle.
Right.
When human lives are at stake in a pressurized, isolated environment, you need protocols. And the source mentions that safety is the highest priority for deep. To achieve this, they partnered with a leading marine classification body called DNV.
DNV is a massive global quality assurance and risk management company. They are heavily involved in maritime and offshore engineering certifications.
Okay.
And the source notes that DNV has been with Deep hand in hand throughout the entire project.
I found this partnership to be one of the most historically significant aspects of the entire Vanguard project, actually. Let's trace it back to our original premise. There hasn't been a new underwater habitat built in 40 years, which creates a massive regulatory vacuum.
Exactly. Because of that 4-decade drought, there was no modern rule book for how to build one safely.
None.
Think about modern construction. If an architect wants to build a new skyscraper in downtown Manhattan today, there are thousands of pages of modern, highly refined building codes. They must follow fire codes, seismic ratings, elevator redundancies.
It's all highly standardized.
Right. And if Boeing wants to build a new airplane, the FAA has staggeringly strict, modernized regulations born from decades of continuous aviation history. But if an engineering firm in 2026 wants to build a sustained underwater habitat utilizing modern lithium-ion batteries, advanced polymers, and AI-driven life support,
The regulations simply didn't exist. They were looking at laws written in the era of rotary phones.
that is wild. You can't just wing it when it comes to hyperbaric environments. No, you cannot take a set of engineering blueprints for a deep-sea ambient pressure laboratory to a standard maritime regulator and ask for a permit. They wouldn't know how to evaluate it. The risk matrix for saturation diving combined with permanent habitation is unique.
So Deep and DNV couldn't just follow the rules. They had to literally author the laws of modern underwater habitation from scratch. The source says they were heavily involved in negotiating the rules and developing a rule set for future habitats.
Yes.
They weren't just building Vanguard, they were constructing the legislative and safety framework for the entire future of the industry.
I want to speculate on what actually goes into a rule book like that because it highlights the complexity of the environment.
Please do.
Think about fire suppression. In a surface building, you use water sprinklers or standard extinguishers. But in an ambient pressure habitat like Vanguard, the atmospheric gas mixture is altered. They are likely breathing a heliox mixture, helium and oxygen, to prevent nitrogen narcosis at depth.
Okay, so the air itself is different.
Very different. How does a fire behave in a hyperbaric environment with a specialized gas mix?
I have no idea.
Exactly. And how do you suppress a toxic electrical fire when the crew cannot simply open a window or run outside? Because stepping outside means instantly drowning or suffering fatal decompression.
Oh, man. You would need incredibly complex, redundant chemical scrubbing systems just to immediately pull the smoke out of the enclosed air.
Exactly. The DNV rulebook would have to mandate quadruple redundancies for life support, dictate the specific non-combustible properties of every wire and fabric brought aboard, and establish brutal stress tests for the structural integrity of the acrylic viewing ports under continuous cyclic loading from ocean currents.
The source quotes the team saying that writing this rulebook was a highly rewarding aspect of the project and that this rule set will serve as a permanent record in the end.
It's a huge legacy.
It really is. They have effectively paved the road through the jungle. Whoever wants to build the next habitat, or the one after that, doesn't have to start from scratch. The safety protocols, the structural baselines, and the risk management frameworks are now officially documented and codified.
And this comprehensive approach extends beyond just the physical structure, too. The text explicitly points out that their work encompasses more than just engineering.
What else are they doing?
Deep is simultaneously building up the training opportunities and the research protocols to ensure that the individuals living and working undersea can do so safely and effectively.
The source calls it the whole complete package for humans being undersea. It's a holistic approach.
It has to be. You can construct an 85-ton, hurricane-proof, technologically flawless titanium habitat. But if the human beings operating inside it do not possess the precise, rigorously drilled protocols for saturation diving, emergency gas management, or how to properly egress through the moon pool during a power failure.
The engineering doesn't matter.
Right. The physical engineering is entirely useless. They had to develop the operational human rulebook concurrently with the structural engineering rulebook.
So we have this ultimate certified underwater laboratory, The hurricane-proof foundation is poured, the life support systems are tested, and the comprehensive safety rulebook has been fully written, vetted, and approved by DNV.
Ready to go.
The natural next question is, who gets the keys to this place? Once the doors open, who actually gets to move into Vanguard and live in the mesophotic zone?
The source material provides a surprisingly diverse list of future residents, indicating that Vanguard is not intended to be an exclusive, hyper-specialized military or purely academic silo.
It says that Vanguard will be ready to start hosting its first undersea explorers in the coming months, contingent on all the final system testing and support crew training being fully complete. And the targeted demographics span multiple industries.
Which is great.
Obviously, marine scientists, biologists, and conservationists are the primary audience, but then the source specifically mentions educators with the goal of expanding access of the sea to students.
The educational potential is vast. We talked about how isolated the mesophotic zone is. Most people will never see it.
I'll never go down there.
But imagine the impact of an educator living aboard Vanguard. Imagine a middle school classroom in Nebraska logging into a live stream where a marine biologist is floating in the Vanguard laboratory, holding a living, glowing specimen they just brought up through the moon pool 10 minutes ago.
It shatters the barrier of distance. It makes the ocean real, immediate, and tangible, rather than just a highly edited documentary on a streaming service.
It's totally different when it's live.
If you want a generation of kids to care about the ocean, you have to let them interact with it live. But while educators make perfect sense, the demographic that really made me pause in the source text was this. Individuals working in the space industry utilizing Vanguard for crew training opportunities. Astronauts.
The crossover between deep-sea habitation and deep space exploration is one of the most fascinating aspects of this project. Space industry professionals are deliberately going into the high-pressure depths of the ocean to train for the infinite vacuum of the stars.
I really had to think about this one. I am familiar with the neutral buoyancy labs, like the massive indoor swimming pool NASA has in Houston, where astronauts put on the bulky EVA suits and practice spacewalks on mock-ups of the space station.
Sure, the classic astronaut footage.
Right. But why do they need to travel to the Florida Keys and lock themselves inside an 85-ton habitat anchored in the mesophotic zone? What does Vanguard offer that a massive indoor pool in Texas doesn't?
It comes down to the psychology of true, inescapable isolation.
Ah, psychology.
Yes, a neutral buoyancy pool in Houston is fantastic for practicing the biomechanics of turning a wrench in zero gravity. But it entirely fails to replicate the psychological reality of being cut off from rescue.
Because they're just in a pool.
Right. If an astronaut in the Houston pool panics, has a medical emergency, or their suit fails, they simply stand up. Or a team of safety divers immediately pulls them to the surface. The danger is simulated.
But in Vanguard, the danger is absolute. You are trapped by the physics of saturation diving.
Precisely. If you make a mistake in an ambient pressure habitat surrounded by the open ocean, the consequences are severe and immediate. The psychological weight of knowing that you cannot simply swim to the surface because your tissues are saturated with gas and a rapid ascent would result in fatal decompression sickness creates an environment of enforced, absolute reliance on your life support systems and your crewmates.
That's intense.
The water above you acts as an impermeable barrier, just like the vacuum of space.
You are locked in. The physical distance to the surface might only be 100 feet, but physiologically you might as well be 250 miles up in orbit. It's a hard barrier.
The space industry utilizes these extreme underwater habitats as high-fidelity analogs. They use them to study team dynamics under continuous stress, to observe conflict resolution in confined spaces, and to monitor how humans perform complex, vital tasks when they are genuinely isolated in an environment that does not support human life.
That makes total sense.
It is the closest terrestrial equivalent to living on a lunar base or a Martian outpost.
I am just marveling at the sheer eclectic variety of roommates you could have down there. The breakfast conversations would be incredible.
Unmatched, really.
Imagine being an educator, adjusting your camera to live stream a biology lesson to 7th graders, while your roommate is a literal astronaut practicing emergency spacewalk procedures in the moon pool. And the other 2 crew members are marine biologists preparing to spend 8 hours out on the reef planting a forest of coral.
It transforms Vanguard into a multidisciplinary hub of extreme innovation.
And speaking of planting a forest, we have to transition to the massive initial focus for the scientific side of Vanguard's mission.
Yes, the coral.
The source text is very explicit about where their priorities lie. It states that future missions could investigate methods for restoring coral habitats. And they frame this with a stark, urgent phrase. They say coral is a real issue for us at the moment, and it is dying off at a rate of knots.
At a rate of knots. It is an evocative old nautical phrase meaning incredibly fast.
Yeah.
And sadly, it is a scientifically accurate assessment of the current crisis.
We hear the headlines constantly, right? The Great Barrier Reef is experiencing mass bleaching events. The reefs in the Florida Keys, right where Vanguard is deploying, are being decimated. But what is actually happening biologically that makes it so catastrophic?
Global coral reefs are facing an existential multi-front war. Rising ocean temperatures stress the coral polyps, causing them to expel the symbiotic algae that provide them with food and their vibrant colors. That is what bleaching is.
So they basically starve.
They do. Simultaneously, increased carbon dioxide absorption is causing ocean acidification, which degrades the calcium carbonate skeletons the corals need to build their structures.
It's dissolving them.
Exactly. Add in agricultural runoff, pollution, and overfishing, and these foundational ecosystems are collapsing at a terrifying speed.
So it's a massive planetary-scale ecological disaster. How does one four-person habitat anchored in the twilight zone help fix a global crisis?
That's the million-dollar question.
The source says Vanguard will give scientists and researchers the crucial time they need to spend down there studying it, planting out nurseries, and building habitats.
This is where we need to deeply analyze the workflow of coral restoration based on the text. Traditional coral restoration, while noble, is agonizingly slow and deeply constrained by the surface diving limitations we discussed earlier.
Right, the decompression limits.
Conservationists dive down, take a tiny fragment of healthy coral, meticulously attach it to a PVC frame to let it grow in an underwater nursery, and then, months later, transplant it back to a dead section of the reef.
It's underwater gardening, but the gardener is always fighting the clock.
They are perpetually fighting the clock. Because they are diving from a boat on the surface, they might only secure an hour or two of actual bottom time per day. The vast majority of their operational day is consumed by decompressing, riding the boat back to shore, cleaning gear, refilling tanks, and waiting for the next dive window.
It is highly inefficient.
Very.
But living on the reef inside Vanguard changes the math entirely. The commute is eliminated. The decompression penalty is gone.
The source emphasizes that having scientists being able to optimize and truly maximize how we conduct coral restoration efforts is going to be incredibly exciting for the global conservation community. The math shifts from hours per week to hours per day.
Because the scientist in Vanguard can spend 6 to 8 hours a day, every single day, out in the water physically tending to the coral. You go from a visiting landscaper who can only water the plants for 10 minutes a week before rushing off, to a live-in caretaker who can tend the nursery all day, every day.
The efficiency gains are exponential. The live-in caretakers can monitor the health of the coral fragments continuously.
And respond in real time.
Exactly. If a sudden temperature spike occurs, they're there to measure the immediate physiological response. If a swarm of coral-eating predators attacks the nursery, they can intervene instantly. They can scale up the physical planting of new habitats by an order of magnitude simply because they have reclaimed the most valuable resource in extreme environments.
They can literally rebuild the reef block by block because they are living inside it. It's an incredible vision.
It really is.
But taking a step back, we have this amazing beachhead moment. We have a certified blueprint for surviving in the deep. We have astronauts training for Mars, educators broadcasting to classrooms, and scientists actively rebuilding the coral reefs from the inside out.
It's a huge achievement already.
But Vanguard, as revolutionary as it is ultimately just one habitat. It only sleeps 4 people. To really grasp the implications of this project, we have to pivot from Vanguard's immediate applications to the grand vision of the company that built it. We have to look at the roadmap.
The roadmap presented in the source material indicates that Deep does not view Vanguard as a one-off stunt. It is the foundation of a highly ambitious, scalable architecture.
The source makes it clear that Vanguard is just the beginning. It is their first habitat, and they anticipate lots of learning opportunities, lots of refining of their systems from this initial deployment.
Of course.
But Deep has a roadmap for continued aggressive development. They want to build larger habitats, they want to utilize modular habitats, and they ultimately want habitats designed for much deeper depths.
This raises a vital question about scalability and the underlying economics of the project. We spent significant time discussing how they worked with DNV to author the permanent rulebook for underwater habitats.
Right.
Why would a company endure years of bureaucratic negotiation and spend millions on unprecedented engineering just to build one small structure that sleeps 4 people?
You don't invent the assembly line just to build one car. You do it so you can mass produce them.
Exactly. The permanent DNV rulebook is the key to mass production. The move to modular habitats means they don't have to reinvent the wheel or recertify the core technology every single time they want to expand. They can rely on standardized, pre-approved engineering principles.
The concept of modular habitats underwater is fascinating. It means they can essentially snap these massive structural components together like subsea Lego blocks to build sprawling campuses.
Though snapping together in a high-pressure, corrosive environment is an engineering nightmare in itself.
I can imagine.
It requires perfectly machined flanges, redundant hydrostatic seals, and locking mechanisms that can withstand immense shear forces without compromising the internal atmospheric pressure.
But once they perfect that modular connection, the growth potential is limitless. If the 4-person crew determines they need a bigger biology laboratory, Deep doesn't have to build an entirely new habitat from scratch.
No, they just add on.
They just lower down a new laboratory module, maneuver it into place, attach it to the existing moon pool port, seal it, pressurize it, and suddenly Vanguard is twice as large.
You can incrementally link living quarters, larger science bays, command centers, perhaps even hydroponic gardens for self-sustaining food sources.
Like an underwater space station.
Exactly. The modular approach allows for exponential organic growth of our underwater footprint. And their stated ambition to deploy to deeper depths indicates a desire to push beyond the mesophotic twilight zone.
To the real deep.
Yeah, they want to adapt this modular technology for the pelagic zones, pushing down into the true abyss where the pressure is exponentially more extreme, but where the majority of the ocean's undiscovered biomass resides.
They are actively building a permanent, scalable infrastructure for the deep sea. But I keep coming back to the fundamental question. Why?
Brutus.
Beyond just the thrill of extreme engineering, beyond the utility of space training, what is the ultimate philosophy driving this massive investment of time and capital? The source ends with a very poignant, almost surprisingly emotional statement from the team.
It does.
It says the overarching goal is to bring this tool to future aquanauts, future oceanographers, and to actively inspire the next generation. And then it delivers this mandate that for our children, for our grandchildren, we have to save what we've got in terms of ocean, so the more we understand about the ocean, the more we can do to protect it.
That concluding thought is the emotional and ecological core of the entire Vanguard project. It synthesizes their technological ambition directly with a plea for planetary survival.
It ties it all together.
The logic is unassailable. You cannot effectively protect an ecosystem that you fundamentally do not understand. And as we established with the hot air balloon and butterfly net analogy, our current understanding of the ocean is heavily fragmented. It is a mosaic missing most of its pieces.
We are trying to draft global conservation policy, trying to protect a massive interconnected biological puzzle when we only possess 5% of the pieces, and most of those pieces are blurry snapshots.
The source argues that intimacy with the environment is a prerequisite for saving it. The more we understand about the ocean, the more we can do to protect it.
Right.
By placing human beings permanently within the environment, by allowing them to observe the continuous cinematic flow of the ecosystem, you generate the sheer volume of high-fidelity data required to implement real, lasting conservation policies. You transition from guessing to knowing.
I find myself reflecting on that initial phrase again, make humans aquatic.
It hits differently now, doesn't it?
It really does. When we started this deep dive, I'll admit it sounded like a slick marketing tagline, a catchy phrase for a brochure. But based on everything we've just unpacked, the necessity of ambient pressure physics to skip decompression, the terrifying urgency of the coral crisis dying at a rate of knots, the absolute need for continuous, uninterrupted observation of the twilight zone. It is not just a tagline. It feels like an absolute necessity for our survival as a species.
It ceases to be a novelty and becomes a functional requirement for planetary management. We protect what we love, and we love what we understand. Intimacy breeds empathy.
We cannot save the oceans, which, let's remember, regulate our global climate, generate massive amounts of the oxygen we breathe, and feed billions of people if we only interact with them from the surface.
No, we can't.
We can't protect an environment that we only visit for 45 frantic minutes at a time while constantly checking our dive computers to make sure we don't die. We have to move in. We have to become neighbors to the ecosystem.
We must transition from being transient tourists to permanent residence.
And Vanguard, with its 85-ton foundation and its brilliantly simple moon pool, is the first set of keys to the new neighborhood.
It truly is the opening of a door that has been welded shut for 40 years.
So, as we wrap up this conversation, I want to turn this focus back directly to you for those of you listening. We have just explored a massive, unprecedented leap in human engineering.
We covered a lot of ground today.
We really did. We have seen how a baffling 40-year drought in underwater innovation has finally been broken by the deployment of Vanguard, a hurricane-proof, ambient pressure scientific base anchored deep in the Florida Keys.
We've covered the fascinating counterintuitive physics of the moon pool, the elimination of decompression trauma for biological samples, the grueling reality of subsurface hurricane forces, and the sheer unmatched efficiency of living inside the ecosystem you are desperately trying to save.
But why should you, going about your day on dry land, care about a high-tech metal tube sitting at the bottom of the ocean? You should care because you are witnessing the opening of a new frontier in real time.
Exactly.
Just as the launch of the International Space Station fundamentally changed our relationship with the cosmos, providing a permanent, illuminated human foothold in the dark vacuum of space, Vanguard stands to fundamentally change our relationship with the 70% of our planet that is covered in water. We are finally, after decades of looking up, turning the telescope around and looking intently into our own depths.
And we are doing so armed with a level of technology, material science, and rigorous safety protocols that simply did not exist 4 decades ago. We are finally equipped to do it right.
Exactly. So I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, something for you to explore on your own that builds on this entire ambitious concept of making humans aquatic. We talked at the very beginning about how we view space exploration with this clean upward momentum, and how the ocean has always felt murky, heavy, and psychologically inaccessible, a dark, terrifying place.
The ultimate hostile frontier.
Right. But think about this. If Vanguard's roadmap is successful, and over the next few decades we actually establish permanent, sprawling, modular cities on the ocean floor, how will that fundamentally change human psychology on a mass scale?
That is a profound question.
When the ocean ceases to be this dark, terrifying alien resource that we just blindly extract fish and drill oil from, and instead becomes our literal neighborhood, our backyard, full of illuminated windows, live streaming educators, and bustling human activity, will that finally be the psychological shift required to save our planet's most vital ecosystem? Once we live there, once we can look out the window and see the reef every morning, will we finally stop destroying it? It is something profound to think about as we watch this beachhead being established. Until next time, keep diving deep.